Hi folks, welcome to week 13, our last week of lectures. This week we'll be discussing the role of media and how it relates to our understanding of identities. So, what do we mean by media? We're talking any sort of text, audio, or video production that's meant to inform or entertain. There are three main types of media: mass market media, new media, and advertising. Until recently, most media was mass market media. Mass media is characterized by high production value, professional writers and/or actors, and wide distribution. There's generally a top-down hierarchy. Executives decide what media to produce and which audiences to target. New media is content developed primarily for online consumption. With new media, there's been a shift in the production model. Costs for distribution and creation tools are significantly cheaper, which means more people can become creators, and their audience does not need to be very large to support their work. This has meant far more people with a wide range of marginalized identities have been able to create and distribute original work, and is accessible to people who might not have heard from people with those identities before. New media includes, but isn't limited to, social media. Advertising is a form of media designed specifically to promote an idea or product. In mass media, because there is such a large audience, advertising is designed to appeal largely to dominant identities. This is because those with dominant identities are likely to be the largest numerically, and have the most financial and social capital to spend on whatever is being advertised. In new media, however, advertising can be highly targeted to the viewer, so there's more advertising appealing to specific types of identities. We're going to focus on mass media and mass media advertising because it still has a wide impact on influencing how those with dominant identities view those with marginalized identities. Mass media is one of the most powerful social and cultural forces that shapes our public consciousness. Let's start by thinking about how class is usually portrayed in mass media. First, let's give some context. Mass media is almost exclusively owned by wealthy people, and that ownership is highly concentrated. 23 corporations own over half of all newspapers, magazines, movie studios, radio stations, and TV stations. The executives who make the final decisions about what is produced are highly compensated as well, and that leads to a tilted view of class in mass media. Most media portrayals of quote-unquote normal people tend to be upper middle class. They usually live in a large, well-appointed home and are rarely concerned about being able to pay for those large houses or the other basics of life such as food and clothing. Because they are positioned as average people, we're supposed to identify with them and aspire to live like them regardless of our own financial circumstances. Wealthy people, by contrast, are usually portrayed as fascinating, frequently benevolent, and living lives we should all envy. There are endless magazines, TV shows, movies, and online sites devoted to the lifestyles of wealthy people, particularly celebrities. Working class people are vastly underrepresented. You're unlikely to see many shows portraying working class people as regular people. More often, working class people are either a faceless group or the butt of jokes for their uneducated or uncultured ways. This problem of representation is exacerbated for poor people. Mass media represents the poor as a group that is either absent from most representations, a faceless statistic, undeserving, such as welfare cheats or drug addicts, an inconvenience getting in the way of middle-class people's shopping, eating, etc., are down on their luck victims to pity, or to blame for being poor. Rarely do we see how systems and institutions keep people poor. We are meant to fear being poor or working class. This perpetuates a constant drive to appear upper middle class, with a consumption of goods and services that makes us seem as though we're upper middle class. This consumption keeps people from real wealth, however, and allows the wealthy to remain wealthy and powerful. Crime is a topic that comes up frequently in media, particularly in fictionalized stories in various forms, but also in reality shows like Cops and Live PD, and in what mugshots are published by news organizations. There's a distinct pattern to how criminals and their crimes are portrayed. White-collar crime, things like embezzlement and insider trading, are deemed non-violent crimes, and the perpetrators are nearly always white and upper middle class. By contrast, almost every other sort of felony is considered a violent crime, including property crime, and the perpetrators are almost always seen as Black or Latinx and poor. So how do these portrayals match up with the reality of the crimes? Well, white-collar crime is portrayed fairly accurately. The majority of all perpetrators are white upper middle class men. However, according to the FBI, most violent crime is also committed by white men, although they are generally poor white men. White-collar crime also harms more people, but our entertainment focus is almost always on violent criminal acts. Why does it matter? It strengthens the stereotype of Black and Latinx men as violent, and it reinforces the association of Black and Latinx people as impoverished, while at the same time makes white-collar crime appear victimless and less dangerous. There are particular stereotypes applied to people of Latinx origin. For masculine people, you have either the Latin lover, a man who is overwhelmingly passionate and sexually aggressive. Antonio Banderas has often been portrayed that way. Or the cholo drug dealer, tough and dangerous. For feminine people, we have similar corollaries. Instead of the Latin lover, we have the sexually erotic, curvy Latina bombshell, exemplified by Shakira, or the tough man-eater, which is a stereotype Michelle Rodriguez often plays. There's a third feminine stereotype as well, the Latina clown. This woman often speaks with a very heavy accent and is usually portrayed as ditzy. The classic example of this is Carmen Miranda, but Sofia Vergara is a modern-day example. You could also argue she fits the stereotype of the Latina bombshell as well. Because of the way we racialize people, Spanish speakers of European descent and those from Latin America who have lighter skin, or who have assimilated into white culture, usually aren't placed into those stereotypes, while darker-skinned people and those with significant accents are far more likely to play stereotyped roles. We don't think of Aubrey Plaza as being Latina, but we definitely think of Jennifer Lopez's Latina identity. We don't think of Tyler Posey or Charlie Sheen as Latino, but we're well aware that Michael Pena is. This matters because it affects how we think of Latinx people when it comes to making decisions about things like immigration, education, criminalization, healthcare, and more. A big source of controversy for Native Americans is the use of Native nicknames and mascots by professional and collegiate sports teams. Studies have found that the use of these names and mascots hurts the self-image of Native youth because they see their culture being shown inaccurately and disrespectfully. While there have been a lot of movements to try and change these names, there's often significant pushback from fans. Unsurprisingly, when interviewed, Natives are most likely to want to change the names and mascots, followed by other racial minorities, while whites were most resistant to the change. In a fairly significant victory, though, the Washington football team recently decided to forego using the team name Redskins. In many areas of media, Black women are stereotyped as hypersexual and sexually available, and that sexuality is commodified, used as a way to sell or enhance whatever is being offered. This sexualization has roots in enslavement, when Black women were regularly taken sexually by white men without their consent and with no legal repercussions. These women were then blamed for their own rapes, because those with power decided that Black women always wanted sex and lured the men to them. We can recognize this as a twisted philosophy now, but it's harder to see how that legacy affects us today. So instead, think about how many famous Black women there are, outside of maybe Oprah, who haven't been used to appear sexually attractive. How often do we see unnamed Black women in sexually provocative positions, or using sexually provocative movements? How does that compare to the number of white women? Like all stereotypes, this one robs Black women of their ability to be seen as fully human and to be taken seriously. It also makes Black women more likely to be the targets of sexual exploitation, trafficking, and sexual assault. Black men, by contrast, are stereotyped as physically strong, athletic, hypersexual, savage, and aggressive. They must be tamed or they will be a threat to society. This also has its roots in enslavement, when the white minority feared the potential of organized Black revolt, and thus did everything possible to keep Black men weakened. We can see this replicated today in the areas Black men are pushed towards, sports and music. In sports, the supposed strength and aggressiveness of Black men is channeled, constrained by the rules of the game. In music, their aggression and sexuality is commodified into a carefully managed image. In both cases, the dream of wealth is dangled as an additional means of control, but only a very small percentage of athletes and musicians become wealthy. In the meantime, they're controlled by the people who own the teams or record labels and the executives who work for them. You'll see lots of black athletes and musicians, but you don't see many black coaches, team owners, or high-volume label owners. The effect of this is that black men may be seen as stars, but not as intelligent professionals capable of more complicated work. The stereotypes of black men being natural athletes or having inherent rhythmic sense also erases the hard work done by these men to be successful, making their success as much about luck and genetics as skill and drive. Finally, these stereotypes are often reinforced by black athletes in the media. When black athletes are seen as good, they're used to support colorblind ideologies. In this particular meme, LeBron James is being held up as an example of a model minority, a black male athlete who is a faithful family man who gives back to the less fortunate. But what does this meme imply about other black athletes? Take a moment here to consider all the possible stereotypes this meme is using James to amplify. I want to leave you with these final thoughts to consider whenever you're consuming media. Who is writing the stories? Who is benefiting from these stories and how? Who is missing from the stories and why? What implications are there for not having those voices represented?